Hola, welcome. My name is Suzanne Titkemeyer. If you know me, you know that I used to write for a place called Pathos called No Longer Quivering. I wrote a daily column for 10 years where I talked about quiverful evangelical churches and everything in between. So, what am I wanting to talk about today? I want to talk about that thing that I absolutely hated the most about being part of a religious organization, 9/11. These are just my opinions. Don't bully anybody. Let me throw that out before I start on 9/11. For me, 9/11 was one of the moments where I started looking at my old church and thinking, these people, they suck a little bit. They suck some. Why? What happened? Well, for me, it was a bunch of stuff that happened. And since then, I have seen that this is not even that uncommon. You have people that deal with these things all the time through these churches. And this was just squishy all around. I guess if you're living under a rock or a cave, you might not know that on September the 11th, 2001, our nation was attacked, or at least the Twin Towers were attacked and the Pentagon was attacked in DC. And thousands of people lost their lives. It was a tragedy. It was an awful tragedy. And for me, it was a personal awful tragedy because while my husband did not work in the Pentagon, he did work adjacent to Capitol Hill. And he disappeared for a number of hours that day. And I'm sitting there freaking out watching the coverage, freaking out, praying frantically for him, for his safety, because the federal government, in their infinite wisdom, just threw everybody out of all the federal buildings in DC and shut the metro. So there was no way to get in and out of the city if you didn't have a car actually in the city. And my husband rode the Virginia Rail Express, the VRE, every single morning. So he couldn't even get to his car. I was freaking out watching this, watching people walking out of DC. It took him until from around 10 o'clock to 3:30 that day to get home. And those were some awful hours for me, made all the worse by everybody at my old church. Why? Because, well, not everybody. I'm exaggerating there. A number of people. A couple of big things happened that day. The entire cell phone network, the phone network on the Eastern Coast went down. So it was really hard to get messages in and out, except for the cell phone. And where we were in the outer line suburbs, it obviously didn't go down. But I couldn't call into DC. I was getting error messages. I didn't know Jim had thrown out his office yet either. So long story short, I had a ton of people from my church either show up or call. And most of them were very nice people saying, I know Jim works in DC. I'm praying for you. Have you heard from him? It was a lot of that. And that was fine. Hey, what happened to Charlotte? No, I didn't hear that. Why did she lose her channel? I have thoughts on Charlotte that I've never shared here, but one of these days I probably will. Just don't be messy. I'm just going to say that when people are messy, eventually it comes back and bites them in the butt. So Charlotte has been doing a real good job of it, but she didn't always start out that way. I'm just going to say she had stuff when she started out, and I was always afraid that she was going to get gotten. She should be fighting it. And I've seen people lose their channels for stupid reasons. Tribal people lost their channel. And YouTube responded to some people, reporting it over and over. And I can't even know why they were reporting it, because tribal people try is merely exactly what the name is. It's tribal people from Pakistan trying Western food and then giving their opinions on it. So back to 9/11, and that's a shocker. That's a shocker about Charlotte. I hope she gets her channel back soon. Most of the people who called were wonderful people. My pastor called. One of my best friends called. In fact, she came and sat with me for a few hours because I was freaking out, not knowing what was going on with my husband. And I used to have, I look forward to today, I couldn't find it. I used to have, I'd say for the longest time, a chat log of myself talking to my friends that day and all the things that were coming out in the news media that Channel 9 WUSA was saying, like that the State Department had been bombed and that this was on fire and that was on fire and there was a plane headed to Capitol Hill, which is where my husband was working. So it was a really stressful day. And in the middle of that, we got people showing up that were doing stuff like one of them, whose name I'm not going to say, he knows who he is, called me up and said, and he was all freaking out. He was a friend of my husband's. He was saying stuff like, if you do not, I was saying stuff about if Jim died, that it would be my fault because it would be unconfessed sin in my life causing his death. And that's kind of where I'm going to go with today, because so many people in the religious world were taking 9/11 and glomming onto their own conspiracy theories. I saw a lot of that when I was going there. And we had big preachers that were saying that as well. I believe it was either Jerry Falwell or Jim Baker, and it might have been both of them, who said that God had judged America and found them to be lacking, and that is what caused 9/11, that it was punishment from God. I don't believe that, okay? I never have believed that that's how God operates. And to have to listen to that garbage from people I knew was just way too much. It was one of those days where it took on a nightmare quality for me, and they were just adding to the nightmare quality. And there were a lot of people who were very sensitive. The school called me up and said, hey, we know one of your people works in DC. Is there somebody home for the kids? I said, yeah, come on, send them. So they sent the kids home early that day. And even my kids were in shock and were having trouble processing what was going on at the time. And it was a long, long time before I started to feel halfway normal again. It was a traumatic day. So for months afterwards, I had to put up with people in my old church saying these conspiracy theories, coming up with all this stuff. And it was particularly awful because we lost people in our community in the Pentagon thing. We had neighbors, well, they weren't in our neighborhood, but they lived in our town. So I guess they were neighbors. Neighbors that were on the plane that hit the Pentagon, that were a husband and wife flight attendant couple, and others local that died. And it was just a shaking up of everything that I'd ever held. No, I grew up in the 60s where there was always the threat of nuclear war, where they would take us and do emergency drills. We'd have to hide under our desks. Now you tell me that a piece of cheap government press board is going to save you from a nuclear bomb. So for me, that was one thing I really hated. I hated the fact that my children were robbed of that security, that they were put into the same fatalistic mindset that I had as a child, that I might not live because of politicians and nuclear war and various things. They got to experience that. And that was something that if I could have shielded my children from, I would have. So that was one thing at No Longer Quivering when I wrote there. And I took everybody's articles who were talking about 9/11 and what happened. And it was all negative. Instead of the church jumping in and doing something positive, including doing things like housing or helping out those people stranded at the airport that could not get back to their home, because that was one of the things that happened. It wasn't just DC subways getting shut down. It was all air traffic throughout the entire United States, and people got trapped different places. I've heard horror stories. I had friends that got trapped and ended up at places for a week or two. A friend of mine who was a flight attendant ended up in Canada for a week and a half before he was able to come home. And having to constantly hear conspiracy theories was just, to me, it was mind-boggling. Look, I get it. Sometimes things happen that are clearly not the way that the popular narrative goes. Okay, yeah. But here's the thing with those things. With every conspiracy, you have to look at them and say, would everybody and their brother in this and involved with this thing be able to keep their trap shut? If the answer is no, then it's very unlikely that it's a conspiracy. So to hear all these conspiracy theories all the time at the church and to read other people talking about their family went nuts and decided it was the end of the world and started stockpiling crap like toilet paper was just a very unpleasant, hard left turn back to Y2K, which we had just lived through in our old church. That was all kinds of conspiracy theories. All my friends at the church were saying, it's the end of the world as we know it. 9/11 wasn't it, but 9/11 was preparing us. I mean, not Y2K wasn't it, but 9/11 is it. So it's the end of the world. It's the end of the world as we know it. No, it wasn't. It was a tragic episode in our nation's history that, yeah, deserves to be remembered. And I always struggle with this day because I don't want to remember. I don't ever want to go back to that terrible day. Let those that want to not celebrate it, remember it, do so. I won't be joining them because for me it was just awful. And to hear everybody else saying that this was the end of the world and that we were all going to die, and various other conspiracy theories involving this, including one of the conspiracy theories I heard that really just was not something I wanted to engage in, was one where people were saying that our government caused it. Our government, that these guys were government agents that took over the planes, and that this was a plot by the government to strip us of all of our rights. Sadly enough, it did strip us of some rights, but not in the way that they were embracing it and saying, oh, this is the worst and this is the end. Not like that at all. What I saw, I remember from that time is we suddenly had to start taking our shoes off and going through huge screenings when we flew, even though the shoe thing came later because of a quote shoe bomber, and increased screenings and scrutiny, and all sorts of civil liberties were disrupted. Yet those are not the ones that everybody in evangelical hood was griping about. So there you have it. Now I'm going to have to go. Now I got to go take a look and see what's going on with Charlotte and see who it was that struck her and why, because that's a big thing. I hope it's not Michelle Sabaté, because she made a ton of videos about Michelle, and YouTube might actually, hey, autistic Jill, good to see you too. She did a lot of videos about Michelle. I think it was about Bot. Everybody keeps saying Bot. Who is Bot? Everybody has been talking about her. And the thing is, I try to stay out of these things. And I try not to do videos about the dramas. The dramas. Best of Truths YouTube. Okay. I'm going to have to look at it and see who that is because everybody keeps talking about her. And I know that she recently supposedly flipped back to Michelle as a supporter. I don't know. She's a known scammer and was caught. Well, I've heard that too. So that's why I've kind of stayed away from all this. It's hard to tell a scammer and who's real and who's not without a scorecard. One of the things that I did recently was I pulled up for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, I kept track of everything going on in the anti-KJ community, including all this weirdness and all the different creators that were fighting and all of the dramas. I was looking back at that the other day and was seeing just a boatload of silliness. including the time that I said, "Hey, that's not cool," and somebody came after me, and all their fans came after me, and I had to apologize. It was the most insincere apology on the planet. I did it just to keep the peace, even though I still thought this person was kind of not so good. And I just decided to sit back and let karma catch up with them, which eventually karma did catch up with them. You should check out Jenny Jen Jen. Oh, I don't like her. They have receipts, but even before Bot came to the drama community, she was in the 90-day community and was booted from there. That 90-day community is a hot mess. Can I just say that? I have never been so freaked out by a community except for them. I've seen what they're saying and doing, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And the Reddit 90-day community is even crazier. Um, so I'm gonna have to dig in this and take a look. You know, I don't know that going after people does you any good. It's good to have content. It's good to have things to talk about. Yeah, well, guess what, Shell? It is a hot mess. The only reason I know about it is I used to be a hardcore Love After Lockup fan. Well, I'm not anymore because the show just kept jumping the shark more and more every season. There'd be a new hold my beer when you would say, how could this show get any worse or get any lower? They like, hold my beer. I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z now. And 90 Day Fiance is produced by the same company that does um, Love After Lockup, Sharp Entertainment. And I question some of the choices made by Sharp Entertainment on both shows. I've watched some 90 Day Fiance, but not near as much as I've watched Love After Lockup. And my daughter is a 90 Day Fiance addict. And I was a Love After Lockup, and our streams crossed. And now we're both of us kind of watch both shows a little bit. And the community is pretty crazy with Love After Lockup too. I can't believe how many times people come in there and say, I was locked up in prison for 10 years. Ask me all your questions. And just like, I love so and so. I want to chase him down in his jail and marry him. It's like, really? You think that the best life partner you can manage is someone that you met on the internet who's in prison? I can't send you the links here, but can link you to the lives, JJJ and Bombshell, who are enemies, but they both agree on bot. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and do that, that would be awesome, because I'm completely out of the loop on all of this. Michelle Sabate was the only one that I ever kept up with, and I kept pronouncing her name the Spanish way, Sabate. So I don't know. Hey, Jack. I don't know for sure what's going on there. And I do know that Michelle Sabate was trying her damnedest to get Charlotte off, offline. So if Bot did that, and Bot is hanging around with Michelle, there's got to be some messy garbage going on there. Hey, Jack, I was just talking about how in the evangelical world with 9/11, what they did was basically come up with every awful conspiracy theory in this entire world that you could come up with and use it as justification for blaming people and saying their sin caused this. Many of them said it was the sin of homosexuality and abortions that caused God to lift his hand of favor off the U.S. and created the 9/11 situation. I dispute that. I think that's a bunch of malarkey. But that was exactly what I was hearing in my old church. And it was an eerie, weird time. Not one plane flew overhead. And we were living in a part of the country right next to D.C. where air traffic every few minutes was a reality. That stopped. It was the quietest, most eerie, strange thing I'd ever lived through because of that. So it's Monday. It's not a fun Monday. I've already been trying to get my camera and my iPad fixed here, striking out. It's the first time I've ever been to an authorized Apple repair shop, and they said, "Oh, we don't do iPads. I get the parts. Why can't you do it?" We don't. We do phones. It's like it's a simple screen replace. So I'm going to do something positive. I'm going to get it in the pool, and I'm going to listen to what's the name of that? Battle of the Bastards, not Battle of the Bastards, Behind the Bastards. That's it. That's one of my all-time favorite channels. Well, Jack, I know most people saw it on TV and it was unreal. My husband disappeared in DC for a number of hours before he finally got home because the federal government threw everybody out of their offices and closed the subway. There was no way to get out of town unless you walked out on foot. So there was that. So I have really bad memories of that day and I avoid it. I had people from my old church calling me up, a couple of them who said that if my husband died, it was my fault because I must have had unconfessed sin in my life. I don't have, I can't imagine, I can't imagine that kind of thought process. I never had that kind of thought process. But I went to church with some people that did, and it was awful all the time when they came up with that. They blamed the residents of New Orleans for being evil when Katrina struck. But most of them started saying that it was the end of the world. They started stockpiling crap for the end of the world as we know it, but it didn't happen. And I like to point to them to the parts of the Bible where it says no man will know the day or the time, the day or the hour, and just try to live your life like the best you can, be the best person you can without this stuff. And that's what's interesting to me about this whole bot thing, best of truth, because I'm seeing a lot of people that are just fighting over silly all the time, all the time. And you're looking at this going, you're wasting your time on this? My mom was in Canada and had no idea what was going on when I did call her. All she said was, you come home, you come home. You have planes falling, you come home. Oh, broke my heart to tell her I couldn't do that. I could imagine it did. I could imagine. I had relatives calling from Louisiana wanting to know if Jim was okay. I had his relatives calling too from Louisiana. I had relatives calling from Indiana, some of his relatives that wanted to know if he was okay. And I had to keep just telling people, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Because the Eastern Seaboard experienced a telephone outage while this was going on. Cell phones didn't go down, but this was 2001, and this is before either Jim or I carried cell phones around. And we started doing that afterwards and started talking about an emergency plan just in case something like that ever happened again. I have to tell you, when we came to the door, the kids and myself and him, we just hugged for the longest time, like shaking almost. We were so upset. My son was in middle school. My daughter was in elementary school when this all went down. And the elementary school called me to make sure someone was at home before they sent her home for early dismissal because they knew we had somebody in the family that worked in DC and that DC had been attacked. So it was just a rough time all the way around, and it was made all the more awful by my evangelical friends. Not by my pastor and my closer friends. They were actually pretty wonderful during that time. It was just a few rotten apples. And then we had the looky-loos that kept calling and asking about Jim. And you could tell by the glee in their voice that they were excited by this tragedy. I think now that they're excited by all this because of the nature of our evangelical church. It was all gossip. People like to talk about each other, and they were trying to gain social currency of gossip. That's all I can think of. And I finally had to talk to the pastor and say, look, could you ask people not to call myself? I don't know about the other ones who work in DC, but you might want to put out a message and say, hey, don't call these people. Don't call them and harass them unless you're a good friend. I mean, if you're a good friend, call them and say, I'm concerned. Can I bring you a casserole? But don't do anything more than that. And sometimes I'm amazed that I stayed in that community as long as I did, because that was definitely a moment when my eyes started to be open for the first time, that this was maybe not a safe place to be. And that maybe some of the things that are being taught weren't true. I'd lived through Y2K, and then we had 9/11. Katrina was still off in the future, but they were all prime verklempt blame the sinfulness of our nation territory going into that. And that was never where my mind went. Okay, you guys, I'm going to go. It's been almost 30 minutes. I just need to go ahead and get in the pool and see if I can remake my mood. Love you guys. Thank you for watching. Hit like, subscribe on the way out. And if not, I'll see you guys next time.